now. Okay, so welcome to today's event, which is all about housing. Now, it's no secret to us all that Devon is in the grip of a housing crisis. And I've heard numerous stories from parish and town councils who've reflected on the challenges of increasing second home ownership, rising short-term rental accommodation, particularly around Airbnbs, also just the general lack of affordable and social housing, and the impact this is having on our communities is a breakdown of social cohesion in communities, but also there's challenges around people's health and the economy as well. And in response to this, the Devon Housing Task Force, which is a partnership of Devon's local authorities, has established a new Devon Housing Commission, which has been set the challenge to develop recommendations to fix our broken housing market. Not a small feat at all. And I'm delighted to be welcoming with us today Lord Richard Best, who is chairman of the Commission and are widely experienced in housing issues, and also his colleague Matthew Dodd from the University of Exeter. And they are going to be sharing with us today some insight into the work of the Commission, and we're going to then have a bit of discussion around our housing issues. So, with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matthew Dodd, who's going to share some slides with us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for setting this up, Cara, and thank you very much for attending, everybody who's here. I did come along to the conference up at the racecourse, so I may have bumped into a few of you there, but if not, hello. I'll just quickly introduce myself, then I'll share a few slides, and we can have a good discussion. So my name is Matthew Dodd. I'm currently on secondment at the University of Exeter from Homes England, which is the government's housing and regeneration agency. So I've worked in housing for a number of years, and I'm really excited to be leading this work on the Devon Housing Commission with Lord Best. So I will share my screen. It worked just now in our practice, didn't it? So hopefully, here we go. We should be okay. So, so I'm hoping everyone can see that. I'm presuming that's a yes. So what we want to talk to you about today is just a little bit about what the Devon Housing Commission is and how it is going to conduct its work, and a little bit about what we've done so far, and also some of our next steps and how you as local parish and town councillors might be able to help us out. So the commission was set up by the Devon Housing Task Force, which is a group of cross-party local politicians supported by senior officers from Devon's 11 local authorities. The aim that the task force set the commission was to think about developing a clear picture of the problems across the local housing markets. We're all aware there's a crisis, and we're all aware of anecdotal tales of what that looks like. Part of the commission's work is to bring that evidence together into one place and develop a clear picture of it, understand what's happening in Devon in the future, in the need for future housing supply tenure types that will also benefits Devon's economic prosperity, growth and social mobility, to think about recommendations that the Housing Commission can make on social housing and housing policy changes, so in a more broader sense, but also provide some of the practical recommendations that hopefully will help deliver an improvement in the housing crisis in Devon. So whether that be to local authorities, to Devon County, housing associations and beyond. So who are the commissioners? So we set up in May with Lord Best, who you'll hear from in a minute, as our chair. We have John Hart, leader of Devon County Council, Dave Thomas, leader of Torbay Borough Council, Chris Penberthy, the housing lead at Plymouth, the MP for North Devon, Selene Saxby, who's been very active and vocal about some of the housing issues that her constituency faces. To look at social mobility, we have Professor Anna Mountford-Zimdars, who is the director of the Centre for Social Mobility at Exeter University. We are represented from housing developers by Keith Miller, who's chair of Kavanagh Homes, which is a locally set up medium-sized house builder based in Torbay, but operating across our area. We have Kareem Hassan, who you may know as former chief exec of Exeter City Council, and is also now on the university's council as well. Judy Pearce, who was the former leader of South Hams District Council and is very active in housing issues across her patch. Alison Ward, who is director of Middlemarch Community Housing. Some of you may have heard of Middlemarch. They provide support to community land trusts who want to deliver housing in their villages mainly, but in urban areas too. We have Jack Starr, who is the chair of Live West Housing Association. Live West is one of the largest housing associations operating across the southwest of England, and has a particular presence in Devon. Its main office is in Exeter, and is also a strategic partner with Homes England. And representing landowners, we have Charles Courtney, who is Earl of Devon, and you may be aware is the owner of Powderham Castle in Teignbridge. So we've got a wide group of people who attend our commission meetings. Just a quick one. This is also, hopefully, I'll send around the slides so you've got these links, which is why I wanted to put these slides in. We have a web page set up on the University of Exeter website, and this tells you all about the commission, and it will also very, very shortly have our minutes, agendas, and other relevant information on the web page. It also has a link to our call for evidence. Now, our call for evidence asks a number of different questions, can be filled in by individuals, by organizations, and we're hoping to gather lots of narrative from the call for evidence, describing some of the situations people are in and looking at some of the solutions and ideas that people are coming up with. I think at last look we had close to 375 responses on that already. But we want to get as many as possible into us so that we can analyze them and look at the evidence. So there's a link there, but you can also just Google Devon Housing Commission, University of Exeter, and that will come up with the web page. We have been releasing some press releases about what we've been up to, which I'll touch on in a minute. Some of the things we've covered already. So you may have seen coverage of us in the press, in Devon Live, on BBC News Regional, Spotlight, etc. So look out for future releases there as well. The Commission has also been in correspondence with ministers. We, in particular, wrote over the summer regarding the short term lettings, which we can talk about in a minute. After our visit to North Devon, received responses from the Housing Minister and relevant culture ministers about some of the government's plans for short term lets, which we will touch on later. So, what have we done so far? Where have we been? We've held 3 Commission meetings so far. We started off just after we began in May, when we were just getting together our commissioners and met in Exeter and looked at two different types of housing development. Firstly, we went to Cranbrook and looked at a large scale strategic development, which was described to us as education led development by some of the team at Cranbrook, and then a completely different small scale 100% affordable rural community led scheme in Cheriton Bishop. It was interesting to see the different types of development that's going on in Devon and the different reactions to those types of development. So that sort of set the scene. Our second meeting in North Devon looked at the link between health and housing, and in particular focused on holiday lets, short-term lets, the impact of second homes, and how that's radically changed the private rented sector in that part of Devon, which is mirrored in other parts of Devon too. We looked at Woolacombe, where a village where there's around 50% second homes and holiday lets. We looked at a nascent scheme, another community land trust, but working with an RP and looking at addressing some of the affordability issues in that small holiday town. And then we moved on to Ilfracombe and looked at some of the challenges facing coastal communities, in particular with HMOs, and with some of the challenges around regenerating housing association estates where right to buy is impacted on who owns what within those estates, and some of the challenges with just the topographical nature of Ilfracombe and how to address some of the housing challenges within that town. Our third meeting, which we held in the last couple of weeks, was in Totnes, and we focused on rural affordable housing, rural homelessness, developing in national parks, and we will soon be writing a letter with regards to rural housing enabling services, which are to DEFRA, who have offered to put some funding into rural housing enabling nationally, which we're hoping that Devon will be able to benefit from. And we heard from the Rural Community Council about their plans for that. So that's where what we've done so far. Fourth meeting will be just after Christmas in Exeter, and we will hold a few extra other sessions as well. So we're looking at covering a number of topics within this, but obviously we can't get around to everywhere, so we'll be doing other sessions like this to make sure that we hear people's views. So I don't know if we want to just pass over to Lord Best to talk about some of how the issues that we've seen nationally play out in Devon, but also some of the other issues that we've touched on.
Yeah, let me pick up and follow on from Matt. And thank you very much, Cara, for organising this, getting us all together. So I'm familiar with the national picture, and I've been comparing what I know about the country as a whole with what's going on in Devon. And what do I find? I find that nearly all of the issues that affect the country as a whole are in a worse position, in a more difficult position when it comes to the West Country, and possibly sometimes to Devon in particular. So incomes are lower than the national average. House prices are vastly higher, so the gap is wider, so fewer people can afford to buy their own homes. Private rented sector is declining in a lot of places, higher interest rates, landlords getting out, deciding that the tax system doesn't work for them and so on. But more so in Devon, because there is the switch into short-term lets, the Airbnb phenomenon, and holiday lets and the coastal towns. So that the PRS is declining even faster in Devon than elsewhere. In fact, compared with immediately prior to COVID, the amount of availability of private renting has halved across the county as a whole and is down 67%. That's down 2/3 the availability of rented accommodation from private landlords since COVID in North Devon. So this is, these are the same problems, but magnified in the West Country and in Devon. And then there's the social housing scene, which should come to the rescue. We desperately need more affordable social housing that ordinary people can afford. And we find that in Devon, the amount of council housing that has been sold is much higher than the national average. And it wasn't as great in the first place as the national average. So the amount of social housing, even if we start building more, is well behind the national picture. So under all these headings, perhaps a bit of a surprise, who thinks of the West Country as in a greater crisis than the rest of the country? But under all these headings, things are worse, more difficult, we're discovering in Devon. So that was all that was about national housing shortage, affordability at the top of Matt's slide here. There are 10, I see, points that you pulled out here, Matt. I won't dwell on all of them, but planning, well, the planning architecture, the way planning works, there are 11 planning authorities in Devon, and this does make life pretty difficult. I mean, already all over the country, there are delays in getting planning permissions through because there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of staff, there's not enough money to pay the people that we need in post. But that's much more difficult if you've got 11 places in which you need officers to be operating. And there are some cases now of sharing, important sharing across borders, but there's still an awful lot of places for people to be needed on the planning side. I look over the just a bit to the left, and there's Cornwall with one unitary, and they can recruit planners rather more easily. You need an ecologist, you need someone who's involved with historic buildings, you need this, you need that. Well, you can have them if you have one planning authority for a whole county instead of 11. It is a lot easier. So that is something, we're not going to change that in a hurry, but it does mean that the capacity to get things organized in terms of planning, to have a local plan that works and everybody understands and we can all get behind, that's more difficult when it is spread amongst so many players. Social housing, well, I've said that we need a lot more of that. Of course we do. We need housing people can actually afford to live in. And we've seen some lovely schemes. We know what can be done, but it does depend on grant. It depends entirely on the government shelling out the money to make social housing work, to make housing associations operate effectively, to pay for a CLT, a community land trust, to do the job, for the council to get back into business. We won't see, I think, a huge growth of council house building. People have asked for it and called for it, but it's very difficult to gear up again after so many years in which we haven't been building any council housing at all. And where we've tried to have a specialist housing company, I see that poor old Exeter's company is in trouble. It's very difficult to get these things to float. You need to have a stock of existing property behind you to fund and give you the security for a future program. And that's difficult to do from a standing start. So social housing is quite difficult to extend, but it's possible, and government could certainly do an awful lot more by simply upping the amount of available resource that should be coming in. Disposals. This has been an interesting thing for me because I haven't really encountered it much before. But some of the housing associations are selling off the properties that they think now are too expensive to maintain and are loss making. Perhaps they're distant from the office. Mrs. Smith keeps requiring small maintenance jobs that cost a fortune for the van to drive out to a lonely spot somewhere. And so the housing associations are deciding to get rid of some of these outlying properties. And that's a retrograde step in the sense that that's fewer affordable social houses. And we need more, not less. So that's an issue we've got to get our heads around. Well, the private rented sector on Matt's list here, disappearing from the market. There is a lot of exiting from the market going on. It's those short-term lets that are making a very big difference. We wrote to Michael Gove and indeed to Lucy Fraser. She's the minister responsible for tourism, Michael Gove for the environment. And we said to them, this is a big issue. And we've corresponded about the registration of all short-term lettings, so we know where they are, if people report as they should, if there's enforcement. But we have a registration system coming down the line. It's been incorporated into the levelling up and regeneration bill, which has been bumbling its way through Parliament. We're more or less finished with it. I did get one amendment through the system, but that bill incorporates a registration scheme for short-term lets for Airbnb. And I think it is very likely, since government has said they approve of it, for us to have a new planning regime whereby if you want to switch from long-term lettings to a short-term let, or you want to switch from owner occupation to a short-term letting to cash in on those tourist hotspots in particular, then you will need planning consent. There will be a use class for short-term lets. You'll need planning consent. And local authorities, if they think there's far too much short-term letting, they can say, no, we're not giving planning consent for this. So I think there's some help coming down the road, but this is a bit of closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, because we have lost an awful lot of private renting, longer term private renting, to the short term market. And the longer term is for local people, and the short term is for tourists, holidaymakers. And we all want them to come and enjoy their holidays, but we don't want them to push out local people who have a claim as having lived here and worked here themselves and needing somewhere to have a permanent home for themselves. So older people now, Devon's figures are that this is true of the West Country as a whole. This is an aging population. the demographic is changing, and we're not really waking up to this. A third of the population very soon will be over the age of 65 in the West Country. A third of the population of the West Country will be over 65, but we're building practically no accommodation that is specifically for older people, that's accessible, that's affordable, that's manageable, that's right for those who want to downsize, to right size, as we say. They're not necessarily going to fewer bedrooms, but they're going to somewhere much more suitable, and indeed trying to ensure that people aren't lonely in old age, because you can get very isolated if you're all on your own. So housing for older people is definitely the future, but we're not really waking up to this. I'm looking forward to getting the figures for Devon, but the national figures are that we need about 35,000 homes a year to meet the demand from those over pension age who want to downsize, who want to move, who are finding that the home they're in unsuitable, too big, too expensive to maintain, rattling about, a garden that's now difficult to keep up. But we're only building not 35,000, but 7 to 8,000, a small fraction of the total that we need. So we're addressing, looking at that issue of older people, not least because in Devon you have the extra phenomenon of people leaving the southeast for the southwest, selling their house for £1 million, buying for 400 and putting 600 in the bank. Who can blame them? But that means that local people don't get a look in with the prices as they are. So rural and coastal housing, it is the cause of the shortages, that you have such an attractive county. The rural areas attract people, the coastal areas attract people. Some of those coastal areas have the special phenomenon of being down market rather than up market. They were the old holiday lettings of yesteryear, the boarding houses, and they now have been taken over by private landlords of not always the best variety, with relatively high rents and very small flats and rather miserable conditions. They can in fact make money on the local housing allowances for those on housing benefit and universal credit. So there is the arrival of landlords looking for a profit, a decent, rather sometimes indecent profit on coastal town lettings. I'm familiar with Blackpool, for example, and you have a kind of mini Blackpool problem in some of those coastal towns, and that requires separate treatment. Not least looking at the local housing allowance, which the landlords charge, and which is far too low to cover the rent in most places, but is so high in a coastal town with a small flat that the landlord can make a really fat profit. So urban brownfield development, we want our cities to develop their brownfield land, do that before we use up any greenfield sites on the outside of those towns. And I was saying to Matt, anyone who thought that Exeter was already full and one has to go outside has only to look at the student letting market to see how loads of student flats have appeared from nowhere, so to speak. Sites are discovered. We put our minds to it, we can find those sites. The volume house builders don't want to go on the brownfield sites. They want to be out in the greenfield sites outside of town, where it's much easier to develop and the profit margins are much greater. But it is very important to put brownfield first, to go in close to the facilities of a town rather than out somewhere where the transport probably is not very good and there aren't the shops and the amenities and the GP surgery and the rest. So we're looking at those brownfield sites too. And sometimes though, a whole new town, if a whole new town can be created that's got all the facilities, all the opportunities. I'm quite familiar with Poundbury, King Charles's village in Dorset, and he has ensured that there is plenty of work opportunities and shops and everything you could want there within that new town on the edge of Dorchester. It is possible to produce that, but the house builders on their own seem unlikely to give us exactly what we want. We may need a bit more intervention to create the kind of new towns that we really need. So housing is really important. It impacts, as Matt's note says here, on the economy, health, social mobility. It certainly does. The poor old economy, if you haven't got anybody living here who's able to do the jobs, then the economy falls apart. Nobody can find the staff, nobody can find the workers to do the things that need to be done. We've got to have decent housing that ordinary people on ordinary incomes can afford if we're to have a proper economy. And then our legacy, well, we'll think about our legacy a bit later. We're finishing up well into next year. And in the meantime, we're gathering up all the information and the ideas from within Devon that we can possibly get our hands on. I think I just finished by saying I had a long conversation with the town clerk for St Ives over the border there in Cornwall to hear how in a place where there's one big unitary, how now we're getting a bit of a renaissance of parish councils and town councils. Because if you are more unified, and that is the trend, to consolidate, to join together when you're devolving power. If you are going in that direction, whether it's combined authorities in some areas, whether it's more unitaries in others, then this does seem to lead to the rejuvenation of parish councils and town councils, because otherwise you have a very big gap between the citizen and the faraway unitary. And that's quite an interesting change, and might be something which in Devon we see more of in the years to come. So feedback from local councils, that would be great. That would help us immensely. And many thanks for listening to me. Back to you, Matt, I think there. Although you're muted. Matt is silent.
Now,
There he is.
can you hear me now? Excellent. Okay, so I think we'll leave it with the slides there, but really, as Beth said, we want to hear from you about your thoughts on this. We want to hear from you now, but also in the future. So you can also contact me, and I'll share my contact details. Cara can share it around with the slides after the meeting. But now I think we could open it up to sort of questions and comments.
Over to you, everyone. Anyone have any questions about what the Commission has been set up to do, or want to share any of their local experiences on housing issues? Liz, was that a hand?
Yeah, sorry, I can't find my hand button for the minute. I just wanted to ask a question about Cranbrook. What did you mean when you said, or what does anybody mean when they say education-led housing? That was a new one on me. What does that mean?
Yeah.
do you want me to take that one, Richard, or do you want to?
Fine. I was fascinated too. It was new to me. It's new to me. It was a lovely idea that based on the school as the hub, rather than having a community centre where adults mostly would be the main players, you'd make the school the hub for the area, and through the children, the parents would be involved in the life of the town. Yeah, but Matt.
Yeah, and I think Cranbrook sort of divides opinion, I think, but there was some sort of quite interesting stuff about how the schools filled up really quickly, and that drove the housing completions as well. Often there'll be the housing is developed, and then there's a trigger point when things like the school and stuff like that are put in by developers who've agreed to it through the Section 106. But in this case, there was part of that, but also the schools saw such a sort of a need for places that it sped up some of the housing delivery within Cranbrook. So it was quite an interesting thing. And yeah, we hadn't heard of education-led development before, but it was quite a good example of it. And the schools had been then after that built with spare capacity and were gradually increasing as the housing increased after that. But it really did sort of put it put the school stuff first. And if you look at the demographics of Cranbrook, it is a very young population compared with the rest of Devon, which sort of shows that, I think. I can see some other hands up as well.
We've got a few that's popped up. I've tried to catch them all in order. Can we go with Pauline, then Ruth, and then Sally, please? Over to you, Pauline.
Thank you. I used to look after East Devon's housing stock because they have their own housing stock. And one of our biggest problems was the fact that when we sold a house, we had to sell 4 houses to buy an extra one back again, because the government used to keep all the money, or they used to keep 2/3 of the money of the sale of the council house, which was really unfair at the time. And I'm not quite sure, because I've actually been knocked out of East Devon, so I don't know what's happened in the last 4 years, whether the government has given the whole amount of money back. I'm not sure. But I mean, I think that was one of the worst things that we ever did, was if you sold a council house, then you should be able to replace it with another one. Yeah. Because we sold an awful lot of stock during that time.
You're so right.
Yeah, and also one of our biggest problems is McCarthy Stone, because they're coming in and they're taking up all the land that is available for social housing. They seem to be buying it under what the council can buy it for. And I think that's the biggest problem, because most people in our area cannot afford McCarthy Stone houses. The actual to buy a flat is all right, but the maintenance and everything else is too expensive for them to afford. So I think it's bringing a lot of people in from the southeast to our area, which is depriving our local people of housing. Thank you.
That's a couple of very important points. I mean, I think on Right to Buy, we have lost, if that's the right word, 2.8 million council houses, which is a big reason why there isn't enough to go around now for people who need housing below the high market rates. But, you know, if they've gone, it is the case that you can now recycle 100%. So we've got that far. What I've argued for is local authorities being able to determine the level of discount, so that instead of it always being 50%, 70% for a flat, you know, been there long enough, 70% discount's ridiculous. But instead of that, the council could determine what it thought was, including a 0% discount if they thought that they'd sold quite enough houses already. But yeah, a bit of stable door there as well, I'm afraid. Then you make the very important point about retirement housing, and how a lot of what is being built is not being built for local people. It's being built for those who are moving from elsewhere. And the only way one can compensate for this is to ensure that there are homes that are affordable to local people as well. And the housing associations are now doing what we call shared ownership for older people, where you can't afford to buy the whole place because your house, if you sell it, is worth 250,000 and the cost of the new place is 350,000, but you could buy a share 75%, and then there's quite a good scheme. It's called OPSO, Older People's Shared Ownership, and you don't pay any rent on the last quarter. So these are the kind of schemes I think that we need to target to get local people into the accommodation that they need, and not just people from elsewhere. But it's a really good point. Thank you for it. I appreciate it.
We go to Ruth next, but can I just ask people to just say where they're from when they're speaking, just to help Matthew and Richard out as well, please. So Ruth and then Sally.
Ruth Bisson-Bunt, Plaistow Parish Council on the edge of Dartmoor. Just a general comment. I'm part of the very small steering committee for the Southern Link training group, and we're trying to increase the understanding of the planning process. So we're starting from a very low ebb, and I've been talking to West Devon about training for parish and town council so that they can understand the process. I'm also talking to Dartmoor National Park about doing the same thing. And what I've discovered from my little corner where I'm working in is that obviously the planning processes are quite different in some ways. It's very difficult for parish and town councillors to understand how they might contribute and how they might actually influence planning decisions perhaps, but planning policy more widely. So a better understanding and communication between the different groups would be really valuable. So a comment rather than a question, I think.
Yeah, but the planning process certainly needs a bit of explanation. So you're doing an important job there to try and get people to understand it, because you can have been in the business a long time and still not understand some of the planning niceties. So you're on to a winner there.
Thank you, Sally.
I'm from Mudbury Parish Council in South Hams. I'm particularly concerned really about the fact that a lot of the housing associations, as you said, seem to be selling off some of their stock at a time when we're already saying that's happened too much in the past. We don't seem to have learnt from our history. What can we do about that? Is there not something that can be done to stop that happening? I mean, I live in shared accommodation myself and was very grateful for that. I would hate to think that there come a time when I can move out that I've got no control over who the property might go to. So is there something perhaps as residents that we could be doing?
Yes. I think raising the profile of the issue is one thing, making a fuss, in other words, making a fuss, because housing associations don't like their reputation to decline. So I think you should make the point vociferously that this is not the way you wish to be treated if you are a resident and there is the possibility of your home being sold over your head. But I mean, there are tougher things we could be recommending, like prohibiting those sales. Housing associations haven't in the past been having this as a practice that's very common. It's been a very exceptional thing in the past. So if this is becoming more prevalent, then perhaps we should say this should stop. Second best to that, or maybe not even second best, is getting another charitable organization to acquire instead of selling on the open market to a private landlord. And that would solve the problem in a different way. So I think there are solutions, but it's slightly annoying that there's a problem there in the first place.
Yeah, just to add to that, having spoken to some of my sort of colleagues at Homes England, they don't get reported the disposal to Homes England, but they are aware through their work with housing associations of slightly different ways of doing it than perhaps is being done particularly in some areas of the South Hams. So we'll also look at whether there are housing associations doing this in a slightly more a slightly different way, should we say, that doesn't have quite such an impact. So sort of gathering some of that best practice as well, we can look at.
Julie, I believe you are next. Julie, are you there? I'm thinking you may have some microphone issues as I can't hear you. So I'm going to go to the next question, which is back to Pauline.
Sorry, I'm Pauline Stott from Exmouth Town Council. One of the things also is that if you build something for over 55s, you don't have to pay any SIL money or any 106 money, which seems really unfair on the health, because you're bringing a lot of elderly people in and yet you're not contributing anything to either the health services or any other thing. And I think if that you could put some form of either 106, so they have to give something back to the community or something, but all these organisations like McCarthy Stone are getting away with building all these places and they always stipulate over 55 or over 65. And they're not actually giving anything back, which perhaps could go, if they did give something back, perhaps it could go into a pot for wherever they were building, to go towards affordable homes or go back to the council and so they could build houses.
Right.
Just a thought.
Well, I'm not sure that the council is obliged to let them off any Section 106 payments. If the council chooses to impose a Section 106 agreement as a condition of planning, they can require some affordable housing, or what we call a commuted sum, cash, instead of 2 or 3 flats or whatever it is. But just because it's for older people, I mean, they certainly will argue that. McCarthy and Stone are very good at arguing their case, but I don't think the council have to give in on it. It's not an obligation in law.
I think one council did actually do that and actually charge them, and they took them to court, and McCarthy Stone won.
This is what they call viability. They say the scheme can't be done at all if we make us pay up. Yeah, that old chestnut. Yeah, well worth us looking into.
I'm just going to try and see if I can get Julie back again. She says she's got some mic issues. Julie, you're more than welcome to put your question or comment in the chat if that helps you. But another chance for you to see if your microphone will work. Not seeing any change there. Liz.
Just unmute myself. I just some comments and questions. I note the comments from Lord Best about the increased influence of towns and parishes where there are unitaries, and you've had some interesting chats in Cornwall. Just going forward, I wonder what your thinking is about that. And the reason that I'm kind of asking that is that there are successful examples around small villages of community land trusts helping to develop housing, especially for local people, and only local people being invited to apply for them. That kind of doesn't work for, well, in my experience, it doesn't work if you're a town, because you fall on, you just fall into the category of having the resources and community infrastructure for large scale developers to introduce themselves to the planners, and that's the kind of development that you get. You might get a housing association as part of that, but what some towns, especially, I don't know whether Julie was going to say this, but I'm sorry, I'm from Crediton, and Julie's from Oakhampton, and we have very similar problems in terms of housing, which is large-scale developments of just one kind, without the opportunity to develop the variety of housing, like has been mentioned, housing for older people and then very old people who maybe don't need full-time care but still need somewhere to live in the community. And the other kind of housing that I don't think gets any attention at all under the present schemes is housing for young people leaving care, specialist housing for people with special needs of particular kinds. So developing, finding out who's in your community and who needs housing. And they do that in villages because it's easier to do it because it's a smaller population, but trying to do it for a town is very complex. And that's one of the reasons why towns, we haven't gone for developing community land trust. For one thing, it's one thing talking to the farmer with the field who's prepared to give a bit of it for community land trust, but try doing that around a town where the land is potentially worth millions. And also it's a very complex thing for towns and towns to get into, with all the other things that we're trying to do to keep the show on the road at the same time. But I do think we need to work harder, but we need kind of more support to do it. And it feels like we're trying to push the cart uphill a lot of the time when it comes to introducing ourselves to the planning department and saying, we want a voice in all this. And that is really hard because the planners, and as you say, there are 11 of them in the county, all who work slightly differently. they are not used to talking to the community at a local level. They find it a bit scary because they don't know what people are going to say. And can you, you know, they always talk about raising aspirations, you know, with no possible outcome. But I think we need to raise aspirations and have an outcome so that local people can be involved and help to make good decisions. I'm always amazed how district councillors don't necessarily know really what's going on in their patch, and they find it really difficult to talk to towns and parishes in a way which is going to give towns and parishes any kind of influence, really, because it's a bit scary for them. That's the end of my rant for the morning.
Yeah. Well, I think just what can parishes do? What can they contribute where they are keen to do that something should happen for local people? I mean, there is a sort of hierarchy of opportunities getting increasingly more difficult or whatever. But yes, CLTs, you could talk to the CLT centrally, and we've got on the commission a representative from Middlemarch, and Devon is noted for its CLTs. You have more CLTs in Devon than in any other county. So they do represent a real opportunity, but very often now that does mean the CLT working with a bigger housing association, because it's so difficult for a CLT, which is based entirely, that stands for Community Land Trust, and it is the community that is leading. And it is tough for a community to understand all the aspects of getting mortgages and loans and grants and the rest of it, and lining up all the professionals and getting through planning consents. So it is often the case that the CLT will now work with a major housing association that's got the staff and got the resources and can do that. That they have to be convinced, that housing association, that it's worthwhile. Which leads me to the rural housing enablers. These are these intermediaries employed by the by Devon Community Together, the Rural Community Council, and who can do just brilliant work in bringing together the landowner and the parish council and the planning authority and a housing association, doing all that hard work, which if you just leave it to the housing association, they'll build bigger schemes somewhere else. But with a rural housing enabler, that can make a real difference in getting people to concentrate on a particular place and a particular opportunity. And then, of course, there are the neighbourhood plans, where people, you know, you don't want to take that task on lightly, do you? Because getting a neighbourhood plan organised is quite a mammoth task. But they are better resourced now. You can get grants to support the production of a neighbourhood plan, and that then feeds in to the planning authority and to what actually happens on the ground, and can be very important and influential. So there are opportunities, but they all require quite a lot of effort and time, and in a busy world and a lot of other calls on people's time, that doesn't always happen. But CLTs, rural housing enablers, neighbourhood plans, working with housing associations, the very tenacious have managed to get more done in Devon than almost anywhere else. But Liz, you make an important and different distinction, which is getting away from the rural areas into urban local councils and their role. You'd have thought easier because development happens in towns. That's what towns are, developed areas. But in practice, more difficult. You haven't got those rural exception sites where planning is only available to the owner of the bit of land because it's for local people. And therefore the value of the land is much lower, and you can make the sums add up and it can really work. You haven't got that opportunity in an urban context where the land's already developed and is already worth $500,000 an acre or whatever it is. So there, I think, you know, it is only the grant-aided social housing that can make affordable housing for local people work. The housing associations nowadays have partnerships with their banker, Homes England, and those partnerships give some flexibility as to which site the housing association will develop and whether it will do older people's housing or young people or whatever. There's some flexibility in negotiation, and if the local community can persuade the housing association operating in their area to behave in the way they want, then you know that synergy can really work.
Can I just, before we leave this, then I didn't realise that Homes England granted housing associations anything. Would Homes England like to be granting things to larger towns so that councils can take the place of housing associations and actually have control of the housing stock? Because I know I was really disappointed to hear you saying at such length how difficult it is going to be to replace the original social housing that we've lost over the last 40 years. So, I mean, I'm looking for ideas for how do you start to replace that? Because I don't think housing associations are the total answer at all, certainly not in the town context.
Can I just come in quickly on the Homes England point, and just quickly on the CLTs as well, because it's linked. As the best says, sometimes it's more defined in a rural setting, and it's more difficult in an urban area. But it can be done, and it has been done. And if you want to get in touch, I'll try and find some examples of where community land trust type development has worked in an urban context. I mean, right from the very biggest, London CLT is one of the most really successful CLTs, but also to the, you know, that's quite different than Crediton. But still, you know, there are towns like that that are either have succeeded or are trying at the moment, and it might be worth talking to some of those. And what Homes England, the way Homes England funds, it has to fund something that is a corporate body to deliver affordable housing. So it can fund a housing association because they're something that's called a registered provider, and they provide, they then own and manage different tenures of affordable housing. Now, there are examples of community land trusts becoming RPs in their own right, or working with RPs to deliver that, as Lord Best mentioned. But there are also examples of town and parish councils taking on that role. Not many, but there are a few. So that might be something that you want to explore. But what we're not talking about is it's difficult to operate in the sort of way that a large housing association does, because the access to finance and things like that is quite different. But there are the odd example of a town council, say, looking at setting up some kind of community land trust in itself. So if you want to get in touch, I'm happy to do a bit of research for you and talk to you about that.
Thank you very much.
I think there might be others that might be also interested in that. I wondered whether maybe we can do like a blog post or something where you can share links and stuff to certain case studies or something. I think that might be really helpful. You used an acronym in there as well, RPs. Just for anyone who doesn't know what an RP is, could you explain?
Sorry, it's a registered provider, so it's registered with the regulator of social housing. And whenever you start talking about community land trusts and registered providers, there are then a whole load of views that come out about what should happen. I mean, people use RP and housing association pretty much interchangeably, although you can be, there are a number of local authorities that are also RPs, but you know, a housing association, if it wants to take public money to deliver affordable housing and then own and manage that housing, it has to be a registered provider, registered with the regulator of social housing.
Okay, so being absolutely clear, a parish or town council would have to become a registered provider in order to be able to access any kind of funding. They're not prohibited from being one.
They never have been yet, I think. That's the trouble.
It's not, yeah, it's not. When you said to be perfectly clear, that's one of those things that isn't all clear. because of the nature of the way that the council is set up and things like that. But in my experience, there have been the odd town and parish council that have become set up a community land trust, and that community land trust has become an RP. But I will go and do a bit more research on that. I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head who've become an RP themselves, but that you know,
Just be something
CLT
useful
version
to
of
explore, I suppose. What's the art of the possible, and whether there is any prohibitions on councils doing that, or whether the CLT route is the only way that they can do that. But it would be interesting to know.
When we had a revenue fund for community housing, a few parish and town councils across the country did access that revenue funding to look at that. But that was through the community housing fund, which was slightly different, but still did require certain criteria to be met. But that funding isn't available at the moment, unfortunately.
Let's hold on to the point, though, that these schemes do exist and success is possible. I did open a lovely scheme in a little village called Powerstock in Dorset, where there was a CLT, but they worked with a housing association. It was one called Hasto Housing Association. They did 12 houses. The village school was on its last knees, I think got 5 pupils left. Suddenly it's restocked because the 12 houses have got 20 odd children to fill the school. It was beautifully designed, sustainable, and all the rest of it. All the homes affordable to local people. Brilliant. I mean, it can happen. It sometimes seems like a miracle, but it can happen, and we mustn't lose sight of that.
Thank you. I think the useful thing I took away from Liz is Liz's contributions. I think is really understanding some of those grassroots barriers that parish and town councils have experienced, and so Liz has had that experience with trying to engage with housing associations. So I'd really welcome other people's views on some of those grassroots challenges that you've had, because that's the knowledge gap that you can give to sort of Matthew and Richard here today. Now I can see there's a couple of people looking to come back in. Julie, I believe, now has her microphone working. Julie.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Oh, fantastic. Golly, so sorry about that. I've got a new device and it's the first time I'd used it on Zoom and I hadn't got a clue how to turn anything on. I actually had about 4 very brief, and I'll keep it very, very brief. Okay, so going back to some of the earlier stuff, we were talking about sale of social housing, and a lot of social landlords sell off because of the poor standard or not meeting EPC or environmental stuff, and it's too expensive to bring it up to spec. And I think, well, that's okay. They absolutely should be replacing, and that is the biggest concern, that they're not replacing those properties with social housing. There is the push within the section 106 we're talking about is affordable housing, which of course is out of the reach of a lot of people, because there's a distinction between social and affordable housing. So I do think that does need to be increased. One of the things that I think would be really helpful is for towns and parishes to work with the communities to develop robust neighbourhood plans, because that puts the detail that enables the local planning authority to perhaps make better decisions and make sure that everybody gets what they want in their particular area. And just listening to what Liz was saying about social places being sold, and what towns can do is that, well, local planning authorities can set up a local authority controlled company, a LAC, and to which that they can then perhaps work with private landlords who are responsible and want to let properties out at maybe a social rent, but have it managed. So that is an option. That's a different look at how things could potentially be done, looking at different options for the way of delivering some social housing to people. That was just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, all 3 of Julie's points. I think disposals, the housing association should replace what they sell. That's a pretty basic request, and I think an entirely right one. The affordable rents are 80% of the market rent, which is still beyond the reach of a lot of people. What we want is what we call social rents, which is done by a formula that takes account of the income of the particular area. They're much lower. They're about half the market rent. So we want the replacement to be social rent and not a higher rent. Otherwise, people are going to run into difficulties. But then neighbourhood plans, yes, another plug for them. Hard work, but well worthwhile getting one's influence in with the planners through a neighbourhood plan. They've got to be taken into account by the planning authority. It's compulsory. And then leasing from private landlords, lease the property so that you don't have to buy it, but you do a deal with the landlord that you will on-let it to the family that the council wishes to house. And that saves on the temporary accommodation bill, which is now mounting. I was hearing how in Cornwall, where the statistics are easier to collect because there's just one authority, the number of people in temporary accommodation has gone up from 200 immediately prior to COVID to 800 just 3 years or whatever we are on from COVID now. 200 to 800 families in temporary accommodation, that's crummy hotels and the rest of it. Not good. Any deals one can do with landlords that people are in proper respectable homes, even if temporarily, that's much better for them. So yeah, those lease agreements, which are very common with London boroughs, nearly all of them now have lease agreements with private landlords. Much better than using hotels and bed and breakfast places, and much cheaper in the long run.
Okay, I believe Brian has been trying to get in with a question.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't got a glove on my computer, and I wondered whether the darn thing was working. Yeah, a number of points. First of all, you have not made any reference to the recent consultations by the Department of Levelling, one which was completed in about just after Christmas and centred on neighbourhood planning, which we are particularly interested in because we are now in our sixth year of a very successful neighbourhood plan, and it's bared out everything that Lord West has said. It's even taken us to the planning inspectorate who backed the neighbourhood plan against a major developer. But then there was a second consultation by government which finished about June with 86 questions about rural areas and the use of derelict buildings, extending permitted rights, and lots of other things. And I'm sure that all of you are aware that as you drive around the country, of these derelict barns, buildings, all of which can be converted to small 1-2 bedroom houses, particularly self-build, lend itself to that sort of cheap job for local people. Any comments about that consultation and whether you have any inside knowledge of when we might get a result in legislation?
Yeah, well, two very important points, and how encouraging that your neighbourhood plan has prevailed. That's great. That's just how it should be. In terms of where the government's going with these PDRs, these permitted development rights, making it easier to get planning permission, speeding up the process, I think it's very likely that the government's proposition, which is basically make it easy to convert a barn into flats or a house, that will go ahead. That's very much in their minds, and the consultation I don't think will deter them from taking that line. Yeah, of course we have probably an election next year, and if we're going to need any more legislation, we're running out of time. The King is coming to see us in Parliament on the 7th of November, and we'll read out a list of things the government's going to try and do in their next term, but they're going to be very pressed for time. We have a big bill, the Renters Reform Bill, coming through. It's had a go in the House of Commons, and that'll eventually come into the House of Lords as well. Renters reform, trying to improve conditions and the circumstances of people in private renting. But yes, permitted development rights, I think that's, and I doubt whether a different government would get in the way of that. It's an easy win. The argument was that if you have an isolated barn, it becomes a house, you've got more traffic because you've got cars going to and fro to the place. But that isn't a big enough argument when we need the houses.
Absolutely, particularly the housing crisis. I have some interesting facts just here that you may be interested in. This applies to Bear Alston. in the last between 2019 and 2023, one property has become available for a housing association to rent within the parish. It was a 1-bedroom flat. It attracted 90 bids.
Wow. What over what period of time was it that you only got the one? Brian, was that one flat only the only one flat over a period of a year?
Sorry, I've lost you.
Only one flat came onto the market. Over what period of time was that? Over a year, during a year, or was that just a one-off? When it did turn up, it had 90 applicants. Don't worry, I get the general point. There's huge demand for just one flat. Yeah, for sure.
Can I also qualify something about the neighbourhood plan? We've had successes, but at the moment we're in the midst of a major battle with Devon highways. So it's not all gravy train.
Oh, highways. Oh. Don't tell me.
We've got another question from Pauline.
Yeah, I was going to say Beer has a community land trust, and they've had 2 developments which have been very successful. And I think that was done through Beer Council. But
I can just come in briefly on there. That was Beer with Jeff Pook. Do you know Jeff?
Yeah, I do know Jeff.
So I worked on that scheme in a previous life at Homes England, the one at the top of Beer there. And yeah, he set up a CLT, and that they became they became their own sort of organisation, and Homes England did fund that scheme actually. So yeah, that's a really they did it themselves, if you like, without housing association help, which it's great stuff. But it was a good scheme to work on, that one. So yeah.
And also on neighbourhood plan, we've had a neighbourhood plan for the last 5 or 6 years now. But the only trouble is you've got to be very careful of your policies, because we've found out some really important mistakes. We put down that we should require 1 and 2 bedroom properties for affordable people. And so when McCarthy Stone actually pulled that to bits, because we didn't actually put down it was for young people. And so they said, well, it says in your neighbourhood plan that you need 1 and 2 bedroom flats. And of course they went to Peel and they got it.
Oh.
You know, so it's very difficult when you're writing a neighbourhood plan for the first time to not really tighten up your policies. And so you've got to be so careful, because they'll find anything they can to undermine you. So but we have had success for a short while, we had success in trying to keep our last bit of employment land. But in the end, we lost it. You know, it's a difficult thing, really. And so make sure your policies are really tight if you do a neighbourhood plan, because we've learned from our mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think Pauline's raising a really important point there. And I think we've discussed it before, haven't we, Matthew, about how effective certain neighbourhood planning policies are. And I think there's probably a lot of learning to be done there and to be shared more widely. Matthew, we've discussed obviously possibly doing something around neighbourhood planning and that sort of stuff. Are you in a position to be able to share your thoughts more on that?
Well, yeah, we talked about trying to find out who had neighbourhood plans in place across Devon, and the types of policies that were within them. So I would like to do some sort of survey at some point on that, and hopefully, you know, colleagues here today would be able to provide us with some information as to where those policies have worked, and you know, just as importantly, where they've had loopholes in them, as just described to us there. So yeah, we would definitely like to gather that information. I'm just actually looking and working with the university. Hopefully there will be someone in post who'll be able to help us do that. So yeah, so watch this space on that.
Okay, so just taken from that, not to email you that detail right now, hold fire for a survey where we can do that.
Yeah, we're going to put a survey together to do it so that we can analyze the information in an easier way, if you like, so we don't have, you know,
that's fine.
inconsistencies.
But it's a takeaway for a potential cause of action, a call to action in the near future.
Definitely.
Thank you, Matthew. Liz.
I just wanted to quickly endorse that. I think that's a really useful piece of work for DALC to be working on next, because it would save all the people who are working on neighbourhood plans now falling into the traps. And also we need to share information on how you circumvent those kinds of mistakes, and just try to work together collectively to make sure that it's especially where the towns are so vulnerable to developers and housing associations who work in a particular way. And I just think let's work together on it. It's something we can really achieve.
I think as Liz is the chairman of DALC and I'm the county officer, I think it's safe to say that we're probably making that commitment now to support the Housing Commission to collate and share the information that comes from that.
That'd be great.
Thanks. We are past the hour now, and I'm sensing that we're kind of slowing down with the queries and comments. So I kind of wanted to just open up to Matthew about, what's the next steps, and how can we get our, continue to feed our views through to the Commission, and how can we continue to support what you're doing to try and tackle our housing problems?
Well, as I'll send the slides through and you can send them around. There is a link there to our survey where if people want to come in as organisations or individuals, they can do that in the and we'll take that back at the university and analyse that and look at the responses there. A survey with regards to neighbourhood plans, that would be a really big help that DALC can do for us or help us with. Like I say, we have an intern starting who's going to hopefully take on some of that work for us, which would be brilliant. Yeah, just keep in touch with us. I'm happy to take questions or anything on email. That's absolutely fine. We may want to come back again at a later date in the Commission's run. We're looking at reporting at sort of late spring next year, early summer. And before that, we may want to come back and talk to this group again. Lord Best, is there anything you would say on that?
No, I picked up a whole load of things that are pointing us in the right direction. That's really helpful. But that's 2 surveys, so I think the one that we're currently running, and we've had about 360 odd submissions in that, which is helpful. All got to be collated, but really useful. And now a new survey which Matt's working on, which will look specifically at neighbourhood plans, and that'll be really helpful if people could help us with that. And that would be the opportunity to share those lessons learned, which Julie was pointing out. That's really useful. Yeah, no, good stuff. Thank you.
Okay then, so it feels like we're getting to a natural close here now. So I'm going to say thank you so much to Lord Richard Best and to Matthew Dodd for coming and talking to us about the work of the Commission. And clearly the conversation doesn't stop here, and there's going to be further opportunities for parish and town councils to keep feeding back their grassroots knowledge and understanding to the Commission in due course. And I will share a copy of this recording, the recording of this meeting today with all of our members, so you can share this with your colleagues also. So thank you everyone for attending. Hope to see you at another event soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.